You can read about it in the newspaper every single day of the week, so I will not go into that. I will say that union bosses today are very frustrated. The proportion of workers who belong to unions peaked in the 1950s. Today, just 12% of the American workforce is unionized. I want to talk a little bit about acts of violence. In the past, union officials have argued that acts of violence committed by union members during labor disputes are protected under the United States Constitution as free speech. A loophole that exists to this very day in the 1946 Federal Hobbs Act actually gives credence to this profoundly thuggish argument. The United States Supreme Court has held that despite the fact that the Hobbs Act was meant to stop violence related to labor disputes, this act does not apply to efforts aimed at achieving legitimate union objectives. Legitimate is the key word there, because what is a legitimate union objective to one person may be a completely illegitimate union objective to someone else. What this means is that unions are now exempted from federal extortion law. Union officials may threaten, intimidate, and harass. Imagine how much worse this would become if unions knew that all they had to do to create a union was to browbeat enough employees to publicly sign a union card. Women would likely be particularly vulnerable to workplace intimidation. Now, some of this is fairly obvious. Women are physically weaker than men. I know some of my fellow female colleagues in the women's rights movement say that there are no differences between men and women, but frankly, there are. It may make some sense to pretend that these differences don't exist, but they do. But it's more than just a physical threat. Women are more likely to be financially vulnerable than men. Women, on average, make less money than men. Women tend to have less seniority. Many working women are supporting children either as a vital part of their family's total earnings or on their own as their children's sole provider. How does a single mother working hard to raise her kids, pay her mortgage, save for college, and save for retirement feel when a union official asks her to sign a card check out in the open in front of everyone? By the way, if you're asked to sign a card check, there's nothing that says yes or no. You just sign. There are many on the political left who think that I paint a ridiculous picture. They think that unions are there specifically to represent the little guy from corporate power. But the real history of unions and the true picture of today's union is much more complicated. In many ways, unions are intent on protecting and advancing a privileged minority at the expense of the general public. Consider the Davis-Bacon Act, which was passed in 1934. I think you mentioned it earlier in your comments, to require construction firms contracting for the federal government to pay their workers locally prevailing wages. Unions were very supportive of the bill for obvious reasons, since it makes sure that union shops can't be underbid by competitors with workers willing to work for less. Lawmakers supported the bill were explicit that one of the effects of this bill would be to keep lower-skilled African-American workers out of federal construction projects. So please tell me why any African-American would ever vote for this bill or ask their member of Congress to do so. I was going to quote Harry. Mm-hmm. Shall I do so? Am I taking too much time? Harry Alford, president of the National Black Chamber of Commerce, testified before Congress in 1999 about how the Davis-Bacon Act continues to negatively impact the African-American community. I'm not quoting him to suck up. It's a very important quote. The exclusivity effect of Davis-Bacon requirements encourages the construction trades to continue its activity of discrimination against African-American labor. Locally, regionally, and nationally, construction trades underrepresent the African-American population. Go to any city or look at any major project and you will find a great disparity against African-American labor. He highlighted the perverse outcomes that this law has created. The city of Detroit, a city 77% black, built a new football stadium and Major League Baseball park, making a huge investment in construction and infrastructure. Yet because these projects were union only, less than 15% of those working on the job were African American. Black leaders also may have a particular appreciation for the need for a secret ballot given the history of intimidation and unfair voting practices that plagued so much of our nation just a few decades ago. Reverend Al Sharpton, who I can't say I quote very often, and hardly a typical ally of corporations in the community that is represented before us today, himself expressed concern about the loss of secret ballot that would occur as a result of this legislation. Al Sharpton has been quoted as saying, "Why wouldn't those of us who support workers being protected, why would we not want their privacy protected? I mean, why would we want them opened up to this possible kind of coercion?" The answer for the unions is likely very simple. They want more members, they want more dues, and they want more political power. This is bad news for many. It is bad news for more than 4 out of 5 construction workers who aren't in a union and don't want to be in a union. It is bad for blacks, Hispanics, and other minority groups that are just as likely to be union workers. And it is bad news for American taxpayers. Forcing the government to contract with union-only firms drives up the cost of any project as much as 10 to 20%. We heard about that already with another example that's been provided for us here in the Washington metropolitan area. And so the question I leave you with today is, can the government afford to be this wasteful in today's economy? Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That reminds me of 1999 when at that congressional hearing, Bobby Scott and Major Ulman, two members of the Congressional Black Caucus, were trying to debate me. And I finally blurted out, I got to check and see if it's in the congressional record, "Why am I defending black employment and you two aren't?"
Yeah.
They got up and left. Next is Josh Ulman. Please.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks for inviting me.